Um, so tomorrow's going to be another beautiful day. It's going to be in the mid-70s. It's supposed to be sunny. Some good springtime weather. Looking forward to the summer. And whenever we have good spring weather like that, whenever the sun is shining down, it really makes me feel motivated. Like, I don't know about you, but over the winter, not motivated to do anything. Sun comes out, I'm like, let's clean this house up. What's all this stuff doing around here? So I start going around and trying to clean some stuff up, and I come to my basement. And I don't know if it's the same with you, but my basement just has boxes and bags and packages and different things, and I'm not even really sure where they came from. I don't know what even is in them because we don't use anything in them or need it, and yet they're just there. They just accumulate and they build up. And so I look at it on a nice spring day and I say, I'm going to clean this out. Get some ambition and say, I'm going to knock this out. I'm going to take an hour. This is going to be clean by when I'm done with it. And then 3 hours go by, and you have bags to throw away, bags to give to Goodwill, and you look at your basement, and it looks exactly the same. It's like, where'd all this, I didn't even make a dent. And so you start to think to yourself, is it even worth it? Should I even try? Can a basement really be cleaned, or will it just forever continue to accumulate more and more junk? In the book of Nehemiah, the people of Jerusalem are charged with a similarly impossible task. But instead of cleaning a garage or a basement, their task is to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So to catch you up to speed, in 586 BC, the Babylonian king destroyed the city of Jerusalem. He just entirely demolished it and destroyed the walls and the city for about 150 years. The city and the walls laid in ruins. The people were sent into exile, and their capital city, the capital city of Jerusalem, was completely destroyed. But then things changed for the Jews. The Babylonian Empire fell, the Persian Empire rose, and the Persian king was more sympathetic to the Jewish case. And so in our story today, Nehemiah, the main character of the story, is a Jew, but also a high-ranking official in the Persian Empire. And as we saw the last two Sundays, when we looked at Nehemiah 1 and Nehemiah 2, we saw how Nehemiah had a burden to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, to restore the city that he was from, that his ancestors were from, to its former glory. And so he asked for support from the Persian king to begin this ambitious rebuilding project. And so today we're going to be looking at Nehemiah 3 through 4, where the people of Jerusalem actually begin to take on this massive rebuilding project. And as the leader, it's Nehemiah's job to keep the people encouraged, to keep them motivated to accomplish this project. And so in the chapters we're going to look at today, we'll see that they're going to begin to ask those same questions once they start this project. They will ask, is it even worth it? Should we even try? Can the walls of Jerusalem really be rebuilt, or will they just forever lie in ruins? Now, the short answer, spoiler, is yes, it is worth it. And Nehemiah 3 through 4 gives us a picture of why their work is worth it. So let's open your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 3 and chapter 4, and we're going to look for some insights for us today. Now, some of the verses are going to be on the screen behind me, but for today, if you have a Bible, if you brought one, or if you have one on your phone, or if you want to grab one in the seat in front of you, it'd be more helpful to open it and see it for yourself, because I'm not going to read it verse by verse. It's better to just skim it and get the big picture. And if you don't have any of those, you can just Google Nehemiah 3 ESV in your search engine, and you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. So, Nehemiah chapter 3. And our section for today is Nehemiah 3 and 4, but we're actually going to go back one verse to Nehemiah 2:20, because it sets some important context for what we're about to talk about today. So Nehemiah 2:20 says this, "And I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem." So this is Nehemiah. He's saying it to his enemies, and he's telling them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we, his servants, will arise and build. And so this sets a really important context for Nehemiah's view of God. And let's look at what he says. He says, God will make us prosper, but we will arise and build. What's interesting about the book of Nehemiah is Nehemiah is constantly intertwining what he thinks God is doing and what he thinks we are doing. If you look at this verse, you ask, who gets the credit for building the wall? Well, I think Nehemiah would say both. I think he would say God gets the credit, but we're also the ones doing this. And we see this kind of theme play out over and over. Nehemiah prays for God's help, and then he acts and does what he sees God doing. And so, although he's talking about work that he's doing, he very much thinks that God himself is the one that's doing it. And this is what the sermon today is going to be about. It's Nehemiah's faith that inspires godly work. Nehemiah's faith inspires godly work. And that's what we're going to look at today. And specifically, we're going to look at 3 attributes of what godly work is like. But before I really get into the sermon, I need to make an important clarification, because I'm going to be using the word work a lot. And I want to define what I mean by the word work. So when I say work, I mean anything at all that takes any effort. Whenever you expend effort into something, it is work. And this could be a paid job, something that you go to get paid for, but it's a lot more than that. It's just any time you put effort into something. And so if you think about your week, if you think about tomorrow and you think about the things that you're going to be putting effort in tomorrow and throughout the week, you can think about a lot of things you're going to be working at. And with this definition, marriage is work. Parenting is work. Friendships are work. Church ministries are work. School is work. Yard work is work. Prayer is work. All these things that you're doing, that you're putting effort into, that's work. And so for the context of this sermon, to set the tone, think about your day tomorrow. Like, actually think about what you're going to be doing tomorrow. What are you going to be putting energy into? That is work. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to be looking at what makes work godly work. What are the attributes that make it godly work? So like I said, we're not going to look at all of chapter 3, but we are going to take a look at chapter 3 to get some insights from it. And I want you just to skim chapter 3 quickly. You're going to see a long list of names that are hard to pronounce, which maybe that's the reason why I didn't want to read it all. Because there's like probably dozens and dozens of these names talking about these different things that people did when they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. And I'm not going to read through this whole section, but I do want to make some observations. First of all, we're talking about godly work, work that Nehemiah thinks that God is doing. And when we look at this list of things that the people are doing, you read that they're repairing the wall. They're putting bricks on the wall and building the gates and putting the bars together. And so in Nehemiah's view, godly work is manual labor in this case. So we need this picture to shake up our category of what we think godly work is. Historically, people have placed work into 2 kinds of categories. One is there's sacred work, and this is the work that pastors and priests do. This is teaching the Bible, giving the sacraments, that kind of special things that are seen as sacred work. And then in the historical view, there's secular work. These are the things that we do on a regular basis, things like farming, things like raising kids. Those are what regular people do on a regular basis. Those are secular work. But Nehemiah takes this distinction between secular work and sacred work and just rips it in half. He says there is no distinction. We see this in verse 1, chapter 3. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set the door. So this first verse, it shows the high priest of Israel doing manual labor and building the wall. In Nehemiah's mind, there's no special work that only priests do and regular work that everyone else does. There's no distinction. It's all just work. Godly work is regular work. I'm 31 years old. Many people my age have really fond memories of growing up in Pittsburgh. On a nice summer day, you'd go to PNC Park, sit in a beautiful ballpark, just enjoy the sunshine, eat some nachos, and watch a really good baseball team beat the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yeah, in my lifetime, the Pirates have just 4 winning seasons. 4. I'm 31 years old. Maybe this year will be different. No, it won't. But PNC Park is a really nice park, and I do have fond memories of it. Did you know that the architect who built PNC Park is actually a Christian? David Grusel is the name of the architect who designed PNC Park. And when he was designing it and building the ballpark, he saw it as godly work. And when he was asked about the role that faith plays in designing ballparks, David Grusel said this: "Ballparks are very much about seeking the welfare of the cities where they are located. I first try to understand the city where I'm working, its history, traditions, architecture, and people. But beyond that, I'm trying to bring my best understanding of urban design to a large building and design it in such a way that it can help the city to flourish. Not just the people in the ballpark, but also the people around the ballpark." So David Grusel saw designing PNC Park as godly work because of the way that it helped the people in the city flourish. He saw it as benefiting the people, and so it was godly work. So, what do you do on a regular basis? Do you see what you do on a regular basis as godly work? Do you see your regular work that you do every day as godly work? And again, I'm not just talking about the work you get paid for, but anything you put effort into. Do you see that as godly work? Because if you don't, you should. The things at your job, the things at your school, things at your house, things at your church, things for family or friends, those things are godly work. Remember that as you do those things, those regular things, you are working for God. And so the first attribute is godly work is regular work. Let's look at 2 more attributes of what godly work is like. Godly work is also cooperative work. So one of the amazing things you see in this chapter 3 here is it paints this beautiful picture of all these people coming together to do work. Now again, if you were to read through this, it's just a long list of names that we're not familiar with, places that we've probably never been to, and it's not super exciting to read through for us. But imagine if you lived in Jerusalem at this time, and you were reading through this, and this wasn't just random names, it was people you knew. It was your neighbors, it was your community. And it just wasn't random places, it was places in your city that were built. You could look at that wall and say, this person repaired this. You could look around and name exactly which communities built which piece of the wall. Hassenaah built the fish gate. We see Hanan repaired the valley gate. Malachijah repaired the dung gate. Malachijah really took one for the team there, repairing the dung gate. Yeah, now his name is forever associated with what we call the dung gate. But imagine, you're reading this and you're seeing this community coming together. It's a picture of the unity and diversity of your city, all coming together to do one thing. And it's not just one certain kind of person, it's every kind of person. There's priests, rulers, there's governors, there's goldsmiths in this list, perfumers, merchants. We see men, women, sons, and daughters all coming together in this cooperative work because they were asked to help. But what's interesting is Nehemiah, the leader, the one that we're talking about, his name isn't in chapter 3. Even though he clearly inspired the building of this wall and he led the project and he brought the people together for their efforts, his name isn't in here because he didn't actually lay a single brick himself. Instead, he was a master recruiter. He was an expert delegator and organizer. And he asked a lot of people to help, many, many people to help so that the project could be complete. God doesn't intend for our work to be done alone. When God created Adam and Eve, he created 2 of them because he said, it's not good for man to be alone. And so they were to help each other in the projects that they had, work as a team. So we know this. We know it's not good for us to work alone. We should work cooperatively. But if it's something we know, why is it that sometimes we still don't see this happening? Why is it sometimes we're still doing tasks alone whenever we probably should be doing them with another person? Well, I think it's because of pride. You might say that people sometimes are too prideful and they're just unwilling to help their neighbor. And that is true. We see it in verse 5. In verse 5 we read, And next to them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. For whatever reason, they felt like they were above the people that they were neighbors to. They didn't feel like they should be doing that work. They were above it. And so pride got in the way for them serving their neighbor. But although that was the issue for some of them, I don't think it's primarily the issue for us. Because if you look at this passage, you see dozens and dozens of different names, and all sorts of different people, when they were asked to help, they said yes. I think the primary issue with pride for us is that we don't ask for help, is that pride gets in the way of us asking for help. Nehemiah asked so many people to help, and they said yes. But if we're really being honest with ourselves, do we ask for help when we probably should? I'm guilty of this more than most. Recently, I cut down some small trees in my yard, clipped off all the branches, made big piles of all the branches. I was digging out the balls of roots, and it was like this painstaking work of trying to get it out. Finally got them all out for a few small trees. I did it completely alone. I didn't ask anyone for help. And then I had this problem, because now I had all these tree branches in my yard, and I really didn't have anywhere to put them. And I had to dispose of these tree branches. Well, my neighbor right across the street has this massive ravine in the back of their backyard. And I knew that if I just asked them, that they would surely say that I could throw my branches in their backyard. But I don't know if you're like me, something just got in the way of me actually asking them. Like, it's not really that hard. I could have just rang the doorbell and asked them a simple question, but for some reason, I just didn't want to take that step and ask for help. I didn't want to ask a simple question. Can anyone else relate to me with this? Why is it hard for us to ask our neighbors such a simple thing? So I cut down all my branches, and I started just putting them in piles, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I was just like, well, I'll put them here for a couple days. Now actually move them over here for a couple days. Maybe I'll just put them in my driveway for a couple of days. Maybe I'll try to chop them up and put them in my garbage can. I don't know. I'm not sure what to do. And then I got this idea, you know what I'll do? I'll get a wood chipper, and I'll just chip them all up, and then I won't have to worry about it because I can make some mulch. So I'm looking at the wood chipper. I'm like, okay, I'll rent one from Home Depot. Okay, it weighs 500 pounds. That's pretty heavy. Then I'm going to have to ask someone to help me lift it. So that's out of the question. I wouldn't want to impose. So finally, one day I was just sitting out there looking at these piles of twigs in my yard and branches, and my neighbor comes over and is like, hey, if you want, you could just throw those in our backyard. And I'm like, that's such a good idea. Thank you for offering. And in my mind, I'm thinking, thank you, God. Take those twigs and throw them in his backyard. For some of us, it's a lot easier to offer our own service to help. It's a lot easier to offer to help someone else than to actually ask for help ourselves. But we have to get over this if we're going to do godly work. Because godly work is cooperative. It's not done alone. It requires us to do things together. We have to be willing to ask someone for help. So this week, what is something that you probably should ask for help with? Who can you ask for help? I think sometimes we think that if we ask someone for help, we're putting this burden on them, like it's something that they don't want to do. And if you feel like that, you can always ask in a way that gives the person the option to say no. You can ask and say, look, if you don't have time to do this, I completely understand. You can say no. But when we fail to make that offer, when we fail to make that ask, we're actually removing the opportunity from that person to get to do godly work. We're taking away their opportunity to do yes to something that would be fulfilling and meaningful to them. And so if you want to ask and leave the option open to say no, that's a great way to ask someone for help. But if you refuse to ask and say no for them, then you're taking away something from them. So we need to learn to ask for help. Godly work is regular work. Godly work is also cooperative work. Next, we're going to look at chapter 4 to see one more attribute of godly work. And this one, we're actually going to read some in chapter 4. So let's read in chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? And Tobiah, the Ammonite, was beside him, and he said, yes, what they are building. If a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. So apparently this guy named Sanballat was leading this military rally in front of his whole army. He was speaking to his army, and he's just mocking the Jews. He's just making fun of them, saying they're never going to be able to build it. And then his ally Tobiah chimes in with this comment of how weak the wall was supposedly supposed to be. By the way, the wall was 9 feet wide, so a fox could not have toppled this wall. But they're mocking them because they see a threat to their reign. So Sanballat was the king of Samaria, and Samaria is where the northern kingdom of Israel was. Samaria, a few hundred years ago, had just been completely destroyed by the kingdom of Assyria, much like how Babylon destroyed Judah and Jerusalem. Assyria had destroyed the area of the northern kingdom, and it was now Samaria. And Samaria was composed of some people who were old surviving Jews, but also it was mixed in with new people who were the colonies of the Assyrian conquerors. And so the people who lived there were kind of this ethnically mixed group of people, some who were relatives of the Jews, but also some who were relatives of this big bad nation of Assyria. So if you've ever heard a sermon about the Good Samaritan that Jesus told, the parable of the Good Samaritan, you'll know that Jews and Samaritans did not like each other. And if we look back, this was true in this story. They did not like each other. Sanballat the Samaritan would see it as a threat to his reign if this new capital city of Jerusalem was reestablished. He would have a much more narrow scope of where he could reign, and his enemy's city would be rebuilt. So obviously he didn't want this to happen. So his first attempt is to kind of make some taunts and just say, you're never going to be able to do it. And then in verse 4, remember this is Nehemiah writing this. In verse 4 we read Nehemiah write, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight. For they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So Sanballat taunts Nehemiah, and Nehemiah's first response is to pray. He prays that and says, God, this isn't a threat to us. It's an insult to you, and hear this insult and give them a just reckoning for what they're saying. And so his first response is to ask for God's help. And then his second immediate response is to start working. And he starts working as an inspiration of the faith that he has of what God will do. So again, we see Nehemiah prays, then he acts. He seeks God's clarity and seeks God's will, and then he acts on God's will, as if it was God working through him. His faith is inspiring this godly work. But it doesn't stop at taunts. It goes further than that. So in verse 7, we see, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, it's a lot of people, when they heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Okay, so it's easy just to insult someone. It's easy to say things in front of your army at a political rally. What's not as easy to do is when it starts to get real and you start to want to take military action. And so it's getting real, and Sanballat and Tobiah are actually conspiring with other grouping allied nations to attack the people. And yet again, in verse 10, we see Nehemiah prays, then he acts. His faith inspires action. In verse 10, we read, in Judah it was said, in verse 9 is where we see he prayed and then it inspired action. In verse 10, we read that this continues. In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. So now the people are starting to get physically discouraged. Their strength is failing. Like, this is hard, backbreaking work, and they just can't keep it up. Like, it's beginning to be exhausting. And as if that wasn't enough, we read in verse 11, our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. So now they're not just being mocked and taunted, and now it's not just backbreaking work, but now it's like a real threat. Like, they're saying, like, we're going to come whenever you least expect it. Like, when you go out to work, you should always have this like thought in the back of my mind, maybe I'm going to be attacked and killed today. That's what their enemies are saying to them. And then in verse 12, we read, at the same time, Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So this verse is a little bit hard to translate, but it probably means something like that the workers, fellow Jews, the people that were Jews but living around the city of Jerusalem, were saying, you guys need to stop. Like, go back to your homes. This work needs to stop. It's not going to be successful. You have a job to do other than just build this city. And so from all sides, they're getting opposition. From their enemies, from their brothers, even from their own hearts, it feels like this work is not going to be able to happen. The previous chapter, chapter 3, was this picture of unity and cooperation of all these people doing this work together. And now chapter 4 isn't sunshine and roses. You think the people of Jerusalem woke up each morning singing the song of the 7 dwarves? You know, hi-ho, it's off to work we go. No! They didn't do that because the people were scared for their lives. They were working their tails off doing backbreaking work. They were being devalued by their enemies, devalued by their brothers. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're scared. They're more like singing, to paraphrase a Blink-182 song, late night, come home, work stinks, I know. Yeah, if you've heard the song, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes godly work stinks. It's not always going to be fun. I'm sure everyone knows what this is like. Your company is mismanaged. Your coworkers are incompetent. Your clients are rude. Maybe your spouse is sick. Your kids are driving you up the wall. And your neighbors aren't holding up their side of the bargain. Your car broke down. Your toilet's leaking. And you just found out today that your in-laws are coming in town and staying with you for a week. That's not my own story, but I don't know what you will do this week, but I know that something you're going to be doing this week will kind of stick, and it will be difficult, and it will be hard. And this chapter in Nehemiah reminds us that godly work sometimes stinks, but it also gives the encouragement to us to keep doing it. So let's read about how Nehemiah, the master inspirer, encouraged the people in verse 13 and 14. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the walls, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Do you notice what Nehemiah doesn't do? He doesn't try to downplay the situation. He doesn't try to say, oh, don't worry, come on, think about the fun parts of what you're doing. Think about, it's not as bad as you really say. No, he doesn't do that. He said, I know it's going to be tough, but think about not what you're doing, but think about why you're doing it. Think about who you're doing it for. He focuses on the why and the who. He says, do not be afraid. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. So Nehemiah reminds us that our faith in God is what's inspiring this work. We are doing this work for God. And we can fight if we need to fight, and God will fight for us if we need to. And then he says, fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah is saying, look, I know it's going to be hard and scary. I know it is a battle, but think about your family. Think about your home. You're not doing this without a purpose. You're doing this for someone. When we do godly work, we do it not because it's fun or easy. We do it out of love. I'm not just talking about the feeling of love, which is certainly there, but the action of love. In the Bible, love is characterized as something where you sacrifice something for the benefit of someone else. That's what Jesus did for us when he loved us. He sacrifices something for the benefit of someone else. And godly work happens when we have this kind of sacrificial love. When we exert effort in some way, not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of someone else. That is loving work. And that's a better measuring rod of what makes work godly work or not. Is it something where your efforts are benefiting someone else? If it is, then it's loving work. And if it's loving work, it is godly work. Loving work is godly work. Do your efforts benefit someone else? If it is, then it's godly work that's worth doing. One time when I was in seminary, I had what you would call a stinky job. I was the assistant to the plumber on a college campus. And as the assistant to the plumber, you don't get to do the fun parts of the plumbing job, like where you're like connecting the pipes and like making it all work together and seeing the water flow through. No, as the assistant to the plumber, you do the stinky parts of the job, and literally stinky. My job was mostly consisted of unclogging toilets and pulling balls of hair out of sinks. I can't really imagine anyone who enjoys that kind of work. Maybe there's someone out there, but I personally did not enjoy that kind of work. But you know who did enjoy that my job existed? The students. Whenever I would go into their dorms with their tiny little sinks and their small bathrooms, they were always so appreciative. Because when you're living in that situation and you don't have a sink that works, when your sink is unclogged, you really feel the love of that person. Although I didn't enjoy my efforts at the time, my efforts in that way did benefit others. They benefited the students. My work was me exerting effort to benefit others. And because my work benefited others, that work that I did, unclogging toilets and sinks, was just as godly as the work that I'm doing today in ministry. Godly work is loving work. That's what makes it godly work. So who benefits from your work? If you're going into work tomorrow, or if you're going to exert effort for your family or your friends, or any way that you're putting your effort in tomorrow, you should ask yourself the question, who is benefiting from this? Who are you loving through your efforts? And now there's all sorts of ways that this works out. Maybe you're loving others by putting a smile on someone's face. That's a way to love another person. Maybe your efforts directly benefit some person. Maybe it's even a person you know. Maybe it's someone in your family. Or maybe you play a small part in a bigger system that benefits a lot of people, or performs a specific task that benefits others. Maybe your work benefits society as a whole. Whatever it is, if your efforts benefit someone else, then you are doing loving work. Maybe your efforts just benefit your family because you're bringing a paycheck home, but you're still benefiting someone else through your work. It's worth taking time to reflect on exactly who's benefiting from your efforts. This is a good question to think about as you leave this morning, either on the car ride home, to think about or talk about with the person next to you. Who benefits from your work? Because if you can answer that question and identify a person, even if it's just a vague concept of a person who might benefit from your work, then you can be sure that it's godly work. So in conclusion, faith inspires godly work. And godly work is regular work. It's work that we do every day. It's cooperative work. We do it with other people. And lastly, godly work is loving work. If your work benefits another person, then it is godly work. As we're getting ready for Monday morning tomorrow, as you're getting ready to work tomorrow, in some way, whatever context it is, take some time to think about exactly who you're benefiting. And if you can identify that, then it is godly work, and it is worth doing. Let's pray.